Hello everyone and welcome back to the Geotech Master channel. In today's video, we are exploring the world of laboratory testing for geotechnical investigations. If you have been following our series, you know we have covered a lot of ground from planning investigations to in situ testing. Now we are moving on to understand what we do with all of the samples we have collected.
So, what questions will we answer in this video then? Well, we'll be looking at what lab testing is and its role in our investigations, the differences between index tests and performance or engineering tests, how to select the correct lab tests for various geotechnical problems, and importantly, how many tests we should conduct. Right then, let's get started, shall we? I know many of you are excited to get into the details, but if you're new here and haven't had the chance to watch our earlier videos in the course called Geotechnical Investigation Essentials, I'd really recommend that you do. This video builds upon the understanding you get from that course, so it's worth taking a look before you carry on. There's a link in the description for your convenience. Why lab testing matters? You see, in the geotechnical investigation process, laboratory testing is absolutely essential. It allows us to carefully analyze the samples we have collected in a controlled environment. This controlled environment means that we can replicate both the existing conditions in the ground and also project conditions that will exist during construction. This helps us understand the material's behavior, and that means we can design safe and efficient structures.